Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are doing another session of language completeness and correctness, consistency and completeness, LCC for short. I've been a little scarce because I've been working very hard on my science project, but this is a meeting we're having. Okay, let's talk about ValueQ.
Right.
I've never understood this function.
Right. Right. So basically, well, except for symbols where it's slightly more clever. And so if you do ValueQ of symbol, I think it'll check for an own value.
That seems useful. That's about the only thing that seems useful to me. Everything else just seems like hopelessly undoable. I mean, if I say ValueQ of f of 7, and I have some condition to evaluate that could take 10 hours to evaluate, I mean, what am I supposed to do?
Right. So what I am suggesting, which could either be a method option or be the new default, but right, what we can do quickly and correctly is scan the symbols in the expression and see if any of them have any down values, down code, etc.
Yes.
And so we could say, well,
it's
we don't know if this
inert. Yeah,
exactly.
Of course, it might not be inert in a container, but it's inert in itself.
Right.
I think that's useful. I mean, we could have a second argument, ValueQ of x per comma, no definitions, in quotes.
Right.
As opposed to ValueQ, which could just be no own value, which could be the default. Or it could be that your one is the default. Your one sounds sensible to me.
Right. I mean, what it currently does for a non-symbol expression is just it evaluates it and sees if it changed.
It's just bonkers. It's just bonkers.
Right.
So what we've got no definitions. We've got
and we could have like
well, actually, we could just have own value. Any definitions?
Right. I'm not sure we need own value if we
might not with any definitions.
Right. And the other one is like
trial evaluation.
Yep.
These are not the same part of speech.
Right.
Definitions present, trial evaluation, definitions test. I mean, honestly, definitions queue might be a better name for this very bizarre concept.
Mm-hmm.
Can we find out where this is used in code? I mean, I can imagine definitions queue basically just says, are there any definitions defined for any things in Expo?
Right.
That's pretty well defined. Any definitions, even if they're slash semied away and etc. Definitions queue for, well, that's
yeah.
Symbol definitions.
Right. So the two main, well, I think one of the main uses of ValueQ, which is where is to see if, right, a sort of a flag, right? So it checks if something has if a variable has an own value, and if it does, it uses that variable for setting some value, and otherwise it uses some default.
Yeah.
And either method is basically going to be
right. Ethan on our live stream comments that it works only for down and own values. I wonder about sub values. I suspect it should work for those, but he's commenting on its failure to work for up values. And that is a good point, because the question in definitions queue, if we had that, is does it define up values? Is it searching around above itself, so to speak, for something?
Well, and certainly symbols definitions present would tell you that, right? Which the trial evaluation would not, because
well, I understand, but right. Symbol definitions present, I think we need to break that into two cases. One is there anything which will affect the value of this on its own? And then if this thing has up values, what could happen? I mean, I think it would also be useful to have a way to find out what it has up values with respect to.
Well, but that's not a Q function. That's and the way you find out what it has up values is by calling up values, right? I mean, I don't see that as a useful exercise.
No, but I'm asking, given this expression, okay, you've got f of g, comma h, comma k, comma whatever, something. Oh, I see. No, nothing. The only thing that could have up values that would affect the outside world is the top level head, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So Ethan on our live stream says that that ValueQ also does something with current value right now.
I was not aware of that. John, are you aware of that?
No, I didn't.
Well, let's find out if it's true.
I don't recall anything about ValueQ at all, and didn't expect to be pulled into this part of discussion at all.
Property value has lots of types of values. Well, property value is turning into annotations, and it's been cleaned up significantly, and I don't think it's relevant to this. I personally favor a definitions queue. I think ValueQ should be quietly retired. I think it's just utterly obscure. Oh, Ethan is saying it doesn't work with current value.
Okay.
I see. I mean, there's system-defined things. Well, but wait a minute. Symbol definitions present is a completely different question from essentially down code present. I mean, not that we'd call it that, but you understand the concept. I mean, in other words, and that's what current value is. I mean, it's symbol definitions present. 2 plus 2 has no symbol definitions present, but it will certainly evaluate to something different. It's
right,
not
which is why I was not thinking definitions should. Right. So my suggested redesign of ValueQ is, it scans for down values, down code. In fact, I even say this somewhere in the notes here. Right. So it scans for all of those things because that's adding real value that users can't really poke.
Well, hold on a second. So I mean, the fact is, we can't and shouldn't distinguish between, unless it's some context game, between user-defined values and our system-defined either.
Agreed.
Internal, yeah.
But the user has no way of asking, does this have down code?
I understand, but it might be useful to say, does this have non-system functions? Does this have non-system functions question mark, non-system functions or symbols that evaluate? Because also, what about the case of system symbols? Do they have, do they have an own value? How does that work? Do they have own code? How does that work?
Well, some of them do.
Okay, but I mean,
so some of them have own values, some of them have own code.
Okay, but they have one or the other of those. They don't have some magic mechanism.
Well, they might have, some of them have a sort of magic own code, but
no, there's I'm going to butt in here, even though I'm not supposed to be in this part of the discussion. So the own value is a part of the symbol struct. So that's pretty fundamental. The thing Itai is referring to is a mechanism for what we call special symbols, where a function is automatically run whenever the symbol is changed. A lot of the dollar symbols are done like that, like $min precision, for example.
Okay, so hold on. So then there is a distinction, I claim, that can be drawn, which I think will be useful here, given that, well, okay, so first question is, okay, if we call it definitions queue, then what are the cases that we want? We want, basically, let's write it down. It's basically any system, any symbols, right? Non-system symbols.
What about like an allowed context?
Yeah, it's possible. Except we don't have anything like that. But maybe. Okay. All right. So then anyway, we could have
I mean, I just don't see the value in renaming this thing. I really don't. I think that's a lot of work for no real gain. I mean, I think having we'll soon have an allowed context. So maybe once we do that, there will be some value of, allowed context to excluded context.
Well, okay, so.
But I think I think the only.
Okay, so then this would be, if we didn't rename, this would be any symbol definitions. Then this would be any non-system symbol definitions. Thank goodness for autocompletion when it works.
Right. Although I'm not.
Well, what other cases are there? There's also any symbol own values, and that's it. Do not consider down values. That seems like it could be useful.
I have a hard time imagining that being useful. I mean, you don't care about any evaluations except for.
Well, I'm trying to check whether the thing is. I don't know. Maybe that's not useful. All right. The question, though, is ValueQ versus definitions Q. I would like to see some use cases of ValueQ. I mean, but give me your argument for why. I mean, is ValueQ understood by people, or is ValueQ utterly obscure?
I think there are lots of bug reports about, the fact that ValueQ evaluates things and causes side effects and behaves.
All right. Okay. So listen, can we collect the bug reports, collect some use cases, and look at this again? I think we've got two paths here. One is to retire ValueQ and make a definitions queue. And the other is to keep ValueQ and give it a second argument, which is these, or a method option, but I would slightly prefer a second argument because I think it's very important to the operation of the function. Okay, but let's take a look at the bug reports, please. Fair?
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess what do you want to know about the bug reports? I mean, the reason I got onto this is because
really get some kind of bucketing of what they are. What are people saying? Is it all the thing evaluated and it had side effects, or is it more confusion about what the heck it does?
It's more the thing evaluates and there are side effects, or it behaves strangely when something is read protected or
oh gosh, let's talk about read protected. What do we do in that case?
Well, I mean, I think we still answer the question honestly, which is easy enough to do, whether or not it has the read protected attribute.
Okay.
As opposed to just
right. We can answer the question of whether it has definitions associated with it because the function f can, we can know whether it has down values and things, but we're not going to answer anything beyond that.
Right. No, you're right. Nor do we attempt to.
Right. I mean, we don't attempt to go into the down value pattern list and go and try and match it or something, do we?
No. I mean, right now, like I said, right now, all it does is that if the first argument is not a symbol, all it does is evaluate the first argument and see if it's different from.
That's horrifying. That's just unbelievably horrifying.
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy.
I've just looked in all the all the internal uses I've looked at so far, the uses we make of ValueQ all seem to be targeted completely at symbols.
Yeah, I didn't think it worked for anything other than symbols.
Right. There's
it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I recently came across, and I wish I had written it down because I can't remember exactly what it was, but I recently came across one internal use of it for not symbols.
Look, all right, so listen. The likely outcome is going to be a bunch of second arguments, the default becoming, are there definitions on the thing, right? Rather than what does it do if you were to evaluate it?
Yep. And
that will be completely equivalent. Well, what about a colon equals own value with /semi?
Well, it will still report true, right?
I know it'll report true in this circumstance, but does it report true right now? Yes, it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Because the own value list is not the empty list.
Okay. Okay, fine. Okay, because that's probably wrong anyway, because the trial evaluation might give something different, because it might say if it's in the morning, the /semi might be, depend on time somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't think that's, okay, fine. All right, we got a direction for this?
I think so.
Okay, let's move on to item 2. The shrink wrapping of 3D graphics. A pet peeve, a serious pet peeve. Okay, that has an absurd amount of white space.
Which is, I find, kind of amusing given that you've insisted more and more padding in 2D plots, but that you, and somehow in 3D plots you object to having lots of padding.
Wait a minute. When did I talk about more padding in 2D plots?
I mean, certainly you did a couple of years ago.
Well, but padding within the frame, right?
Yes.
Having things not collide with the frame. Okay,
Yes.
This is crazy. So it's just stupid. I mean, so let's just, we just need to figure out what to do.
Right. So your proposal after Itai put this agenda together was spherical region goes to none.
Yeah, but I think we should change the default because I think this default is nuts. I don't think anybody, you don't see a box. There isn't a box. Box, where's the box? The fact that this had a box around it is just like, well, it's kind of like, I don't know, why does it remind me of I should collect these things for some reason. I'm reminded of this incredibly campy, weird old movie called Dark Star, which I think a George Lucas production, about these people who went around and blew up planets that might become unstable in order to prevent people from settling on them. Okay, that was an irrelevant analogy. Apologies for that. but I mean, it might have a box, so let's give it tons of space.
Right. Well, but you might rotate it, right?
That's a different issue. That's the spherical region issue. And personally, I'm perfectly happy. Look, yes, I think you might very well rotate it. But I think that, the default action, okay, let's talk about when, it is possible that spherical region should become automatic and should be a little bit more sophisticated. Just like we know that a graphic size under image size actions changes depending on whether it's on a list or not, right? It's possible that, for example, if this thing finds itself in a manipulate, that it should default to spherical region to true. I don't know. But, in the general usage, you do not want all this stupid empty space.
Right. Well, I would worry a bit about changing the default and what downstream effects, but maybe John and Brett have more informed opinions about whether that might cause
What's happening right now is just stupid.
Well, it's just stupid in this one case.
No, I don't know of any case where it isn't.
I mean, it's, in the case where you aren't drawing the box.
Yeah, it's stupid.
As soon as you have the box, it's all good.
Yeah. The box is fine. Once you have the box, you leave room for the box. I'm good with that. When you don't draw the box, you shouldn't leave the space. And particularly not in Graph 3D, which doesn't, have a box by default. I mean, that's the really weird case, okay? Because most things do have boxes by default. Graphics 3D has a box by default. I think if you get rid of the box, a spherical region arrow automatic should get rid of the space as well. Okay, let's talk about the different cases.
I should also point out, rotation was mentioned, but we're already dealing. I mean, you can even see it in a subtle way with this issue with rotation. It does potentially change size on rotation, and there are cases where there's a much more dramatic change in size.
Okay. So I agree if it has a long aspect ratio. Okay, so there's room for rotation. Okay, that's one question.
So let me, just to make sure everyone understands what happens on rotation, I just threw a simple thing in chat that you can copy and paste and see.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, John, we have a beep here. We have a beep.
Open the edit menu. Okay. So it doesn't know that there's something on the clipboard.
Okay, so let's see. So let me recopy this from here. Okay, very carefully. I'm going to type Command C. Okay, now let me check that another application knows that it's on the clipboard. Okay, so I'm going to paste it into email, and it happily knows that it's on the clipboard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go over here. Oh, it pasted this time. I wonder whether the pasting into another application changed something.
It's possible.
It does. Possible. I mean, sometimes I have to do that to get it to work, pasting in the front end.
Yeah, well, I think, and the other thing is changing window focus. By the way, John, this crazy thing with my machine, which might be, my machine just had its operating system reinstalled.
I'm not at all convinced that what you were seeing is our problem. The level of craziness is far beyond anything anyone has ever reported.
Well, I agree, but it's new, but it might be new because I have a new machine.
Yeah.
I also noted that I really had really huge things on the clipboard, and that seemed to potentially be related. But let's find out what happens over the next few days.
Okay.
Okay, a big long bar.
And just to make it clear, click on the graphics so we can see its bounds. And see how it changes when you
personally
rotate.
I think the behavior we have right now is beautiful. When the mouse is held down, the thing leaves enough space for itself. Let's start in that state. Okay, now I hold the mouse down and I start moving. This is beautiful. What it does right now is absolutely magnificent.
Right. And I only raise this because we were talking about, quote, leaving enough room for rotation. I just wanted to make it clear that we already deal with, making room for rotation.
I think it's great. I think what we do right now is great. I think the only mistake here is leaving room for the stupid box when there isn't a box. Now, the spherical region thing would leave, in this case, full room for rotation. And I think that's a red herring from the main issue here. I mean, so that leaves room for rotation, natural rotation, right? Now, in the case where we are, the spherical region thing is independent of boxiness. By the way, I think there's something wrong with the motion controller, with the rotation controller here. I just want to make that comment. I think things are backward rotating when I look. If I move this steadily this way, okay. Well, let's say I try to twist this over, okay. Say I try to rotate it to see the other side of it, okay. Yutsu, tell me how to do that. I want to twist this to see the other side of the bar.
Usually, and if you hit, for example, like a right in the middle and drag it to the middle to the left to see if.
No, I'm still rotating there. I mean, if I hit exactly the center of mass, I'm gonna twist it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so explain that to me, because I don't think this is the right behavior. Is there some region where it will do a different thing in the 3D space?
So we, for the spherical region, we are.
No, it has nothing to do with spherical region. This issue has to do with rotation control. It doesn't have anything to do with spherical region, does it? I'll do the same thing without spherical region.
Okay, I can tell you a way to do it.
I'm more successful when spherical region is not on, but I don't know if that's
look at this thing. Look at this thing. This thing is, let's see if I can, okay, my exercise is to see the other side of this bar. Okay, I finally got it. Because I managed to, because by pulling the mouse left, I wasn't rotating. Now, I mean, we worked on this several years ago, the rotation controller, the question of how the rotation controller works. I mean, presumably you can draw a vector field here, and you can label the arrows of the vector field with what it's going to do in 3D space. True or not true?
True.
Okay, what does the vector field look like? That is, each arrow at each point, at each base point, and each mouse direction, there is an implication for a rotation in 3D.
By the way, I should say that's assuming that you are dragging in a straight line.
I see.
Because there's a point when you get far enough out when you can kind of move around the image, and it rotates the image. Well, one would think maybe it should be in the plane of the screen. It's not quite in the plane of the screen.
So if I had a gamepad hooked up, it would do something different, true? It would actually have more degrees of freedom.
I don't remember if it's more degrees or not.
It should be. Yusu, do you know? I mean, I've been doing a bunch of stuff with 3D objects. I'm about to hook up a gamepad to my computer. So am I going to be happy?
I think it depends on the rotation method you specified. The current, I'm trying to remember the current behavior.
So if you like Plot 3D, correct me if I'm wrong, you two, but I believe Plot 3D has a different
rotation methods, right? Yeah. Because it tends to not flip itself upside down.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to be honest, it's been a while since any of us have looked at the USB controller mechanism.
Well, fine. I'm not as concerned about that. I'm concerned about the default here. And the truth is, I mean, fancy animation programs bring up this whole very hard to understand sphere with lines and this, that, and the other when you rotate. We don't need that. But it will be useful, or maybe we need it if you hold down a key or something. I mean, this is exactly where, the toolbar that is supposed to get attached to 3D graphics, which I imagine is in Noah's path to work on, could be useful by potentially having some tabbing mechanism where you can tab it into different rotation controls. Comments?
Yeah, we haven't spent much time thinking about that, but yes, potentially.
Right. I mean, the fact is, what we need to do there is, it's an exercise. Given this shape, I want to see, just paint numbers on it, and I want to see how long it takes you to get that number to the front. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good way of understanding whether we have a rotation controller that people understand.
Can you try it with a 111 cube instead? I'm wondering if there's a scaling issue because of the aspect ratio that...
Yeah, I have a much easier time with things like this. This is much more natural. I mean, if I'd make it even a 3, the problem is that I keep on hitting. Okay, so I go to this case here, and the problem is, okay, so right now, yeah.
Okay, I can believe. I know you two and I have looked at code that deals with, tries to deal with some issues for things with extreme aspect ratios, and I can believe that there may be some.
You know what? I think we're looking at a baguette here, because I think what's happening is, as Brett has surmised, what's happening is, so long as, and Yusu, maybe you can comment on, is there a discontinuous thing? So right here, as I move it, but by the way, whenever it tumbles, it's wrong, right? If I move continuously, the thing better not tumble. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, I'm going to try to rotate the middle. Okay, so first of all, there was a bit of discontinuous tumbling there, and now we're not even rotating anymore for reasons I don't understand. Why aren't we rotating anymore? My mouse is out to the right. Why aren't we rotating anymore?
Because you're in a different mode. And this is, let's do this with something that is closer to working. Let's take the unit cube there.
Okay.
And now drag out to the side.
I see. When I hit it, when I'm outside the bounding box.
And now move in a circle around.
Oh my God.
No,
well, a circle. Look at this.
Sorry. No, what I mean is a circle all the way around the graphic.
Oh, I see.
Outside the graphic, but move.
Because right now I go in a circle and it's nodding its head.
Well, it's because you're not doing what I intended you to do.
I know, because
draw
the
all
horizontal motion,
the way around the.
I understand the horizontal motion. I got it. The circle all the way around the graphic does some kind of somewhat useful thing. But over here, the horizontal motion is irrelevant. It's ignoring the horizontal motion for some reason.
That's right. Once you've hit a certain extent, then you've basically switched into a different rotation controller.
Yeah.
But why didn't the icon change?
Well, I think because we've never thought about trying to communicate that.
That would be a good idea.
Right. Well, I mean, so if Stephen puts his cursor at the top right corner of the graphic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. What's that?
Yeah, that's now the just the circle mode and nothing else.
Well, that's nice. But then over here is a mode of unknown modiness. I mean, what is that mode? Is that the circle mode or is that some other mode?
It's the circle mode as long as you stay outside of the circle. If you move back in, then it's...
Well, so then change cursors.
Yeah.
I think it's just the wrong cursor there. I think that's correct.
I agree.
So we've got two issues here. One is we've got the long bar issue of just how much of the middle of the bar is XY plane rotation, right? And that seems to be reasonable for these things that are fairly spherical, but it seems to be fairly unreasonable for these things that are deeply, whatever, prolate or something, right? So can we figure out how to fix that? Yusu, I think that's for you.
Yep.
Please try to figure out what's going on. Okay. Meanwhile, I propose that the only thing we need, I claim, is getting rid of the stupid room for the box.
So
if we didn't have the space for the box, everything would be great.
So I'm hesitant to do that in 12.1, but I would like to have enough time to make sure that we're not making a huge mistake that will take some time to work its way to the surface. But in principle, I'm not going to disagree with you.
Well, let's put spherical region arrow none, make it do that. I would like that. I would really like that to be the default for Graph 3D. I don't think this issue has come up. Do we have Charles in this meeting? Can we ask Charles? I don't think this issue has come up for Graph 3D. That's the case where I'm most passionate about it, so to speak. Look, I've never seen it be useful in the case where you don't have a box. Can we poll Charles and Roger? And if neither of them sees a problem with this, I think we should really try to do it.
Well, if you just want Graph 3D to add the shrink wrap, right?
Yeah, but I don't want I want that shrink wrap to be packaged in a less absurd way. So like spherical,
right? But but it's not an exposed option to Graph 3D, right? So Graph 3D could just set it when it's generating its graphics.
Well, I understand, but what it could set is spherical region arrow none by default, which is this basically. Because we do want to be able to make it have a spherical region. Look, the fact is, okay, is there a spherical region automatic right now? Look, this has nothing to do with this.
Right now, I think it's true, false, or a sphere.
What do you mean, or a sphere? Or you mean an actual sphere?
I mean, you can specify, the center and radius. That was what, a 12.0 feature, John, or was it 11.3 or something?
It's not documented. So you're telling me that if I go here and I say, so let's take out my cuboid as an example. If I say here,
yeah, I was just told to implement it, not to document it.
Funny. Okay, so let's.
Well, I mean, in all seriousness, this was. Let's see. Actually, it looks like you two did write up some stuff.
Oh, and look at this! Look at this! Look at this weird thing! Look at this weird creature! What is it doing?
Well, your
sphere is centered at 0, 0.
And that's where one of the vertices of your cube is.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Magnificent. Okay.
And you want your sphere, you want to center your sphere at 1/2, 1/2, 1/2.
Yeah. I apologize. You two actually did write some documentation for this, and it slipped past my review, so I can take care of that right now.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think you got it maybe in Graphics 3D or something, John. But
okay. Okay. So there's documentation issue. It should not be on John. It should be in Brett's team to document this. Please.
Well, so sometimes it's a bit slippery where it is because Brett's team was the one that requested it, but
no, it came out of Jeff, I think.
Okay.
Anyway,
somebody other than us requested it, but we're the ones that understand the consequences.
Okay.
Because we implemented it.
Okay. So the box business, the space for the box question, to my mind, it is just a bug. If there isn't a box, there shouldn't be space for it. Period. End of story. And I think we should simply fix that bug. I don't really think that. Okay, so
well, we can try. We can try that.
So the question is, if you wanted to leave, hold on. If you want to leave space for a box, how would you do it? Really, what we want is spherical region, somewhat obscurely arrow cube. right? I mean, it's spherical region arrow box is what it really is. And really, spherical region should have been called something like rotation region or something. Well, spherical region, okay. You see what I'm saying? I mean, this is...
Yeah, I mean, basically you want, I mean, going further down that slope is providing, a dodecahedron or something, or...
Sure. Which there's no reason we can't do. I mean, we know where it's like there is a dodecahedron, but you don't see it. But please use it for my bounding box. Now, reason why you might care about that is if you've got 5 graphics in a row, and what you want is I mean, here's what I would do. I mean, if I've got 5 graphics in a row and I want them all to agree in terms of absolute size, I would throw them all into a region union or something to define the size. Am I making sense? What would actually work there? So let's imagine that spherical region was able to take graphics primitives as, some arbitrary set of graphics primitives. So in particular, if you had, it could just take the graphics primitives and leave enough room for them. Leave enough room, well, okay, so there are 2 questions. Leave enough room for them where they are, and leave enough room for them if rotated. See what I'm saying?
Right.
Both are interesting. I mean, in fact, the leave enough room for where they are would be useful for 2D graphics as well. Because that's an issue of, of lining up when you have multiple graphics in some collection, making sure that they all agree.
They all have the same plot range and...
Right. But I mean,
whatever.
And so the way to do that would be to just collect everything and say, here's everything I want to, Okay, so what that really is it is things considered for purposes of deciding the graphic size. What is the graphic size? What is the thing? I mean, there's plot range padding, but what is the thing that determines? Is this a plot range padding issue?
It's not.
I think it's closer to image padding. Maybe. But it's not really that either. But
I don't know what you mean by closer to. It's not. What analogy are you trying to draw? I don't understand.
I just want to know what
it's closer to image padding in the sense that
it's not literally any of those paddings. So what are you trying to say metaphorically it is?
I'm saying that it's closer to image padding in the sense that image padding in 2D is padding outside the frame. And this is padding outside the plot range.
Okay, question. In this padded area, nothing will ever draw, true or not true. In other words, if the plot range was restricted the size of the graphic, but it extends into this region, is it clipped before it gets to this region, or does it extend into the region because it can?
Clipped, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, in fact, genuinely just padding. And I think there are 2 cases of padding. There is padding that is in case of rotation, and there's padding just because leaving room for invisible primitives. Okay, so the 2 cases, right? Padding, I mean, it's basically padding for invisible primitives, for unrendered primitives and things like boxes and options, like boxes or like ticks, because I could have like boxes or ticks, because I could have some great big tick specification there that has that draws a picture of a I don't know, of a tree or something in my tick labels. Okay, so that's one case. There's padding for unrendered primitives, and there's padding for potential rotations. Right? Okay, so let's consider the case of padding for things. Boy, you see, if I say I want padding for boxes, but I didn't specify the box ratios yet. See what I'm saying? I could have a different padding. I mean, like what business is it? I mean, this is another bug, bug creature here, right? Because this thing, let's see what happens if I say box ratios arrow 1 to 2 to 1, 1 to 3 to 1, whatever. Oh boy, that's wild. Is that really what we want? That's just crazy, right? Maybe we should get Charles here. This seems crazy. What just happened here? Somebody look for Charles, please.
At least earlier this morning, he was unavailable.
Okay. Okay. Well, there it is with a box.
Hey, and just so you know, I'm throwing in the chat the way to actually show this fully shrink wrapped.
This one here.
The original example, but you can extend it to anything you want using the same method.
Yeah, I've been. I got a beep failure. I got a beep failure.
Don't I have it in the agenda? I think I had. If you.
I have another beep failure. Is there anything you want me to look at, John?
I know what I need to know as much as I can debug it for now. Yeah.
Let's just see if changing the focus changes it. Okay. Oh, it did. Changing the window focus changed it as well, John.
Okay.
Boy, that would be a nice bug to nail. Okay, beautiful, magnificent, exactly what we want. And we rotate it and it leaves room and we're just golden. Exactly the right behavior.
That is documented, by the way.
What is?
The method option.
Okay, fine, but it's totally obscure and it's the wrong default.
I mean, all method options are obscure, but yes.
Okay, now were we to have the shrink wrap and we had boxed, but what does the shrink wrap thing do?
I'm not 100% certain how shrink wrap interacts with spherical region. It's possible that it might do the wrong thing with spherical region. I just haven't tried it.
Let's try this.
You want to make boxed false again?
No, I'm happy to. Okay, so that's fine. Well, except it's clipping from time to time, and I thought that's what spherical region said it shouldn't do. It should never get into that clipping state.
Yeah, and that's what I'm stipulating is there might be that kind of issue.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd prefer to have that issue than to have all these graphics be the wrong size.
Right. I mean, if we repeat that with just box goes to false, right, then presumably we won't get any clipping. Or actually,
unless we get clipping on the actual primitives themselves, hopefully not.
We got a little bit of clipping there. I don't think this was the worst case for this. Wait a minute, spherical region to true, shouldn't that leave the space for the thing?
Well, and I think, I don't know if YouTube knows this off the top of his head, but that's what I'm saying is I think the shrink wrapping method might just be kind of blowing through the spherical region code.
Okay, this is crazy, right? What just happened here is just bonkers. Bonkers, bonkers, bonkers.
Why?
Why is it leaving room for the box when there isn't a box? It doesn't need the room for that. To get a spherical region for the object shown does not need room for the box.
It was trying to so
it's obviously wrong. I'm sorry, it's just obviously wrong. Go ahead.
Well, it's consistent with the current behavior of box goes to false, right? So
it's just wrong. The behavior of box goes to false. The question of whether there is a virtual box is an independent question from whether spherical region is true.
Stephen, though, it may be quite difficult to compute.
What
It is.
I mean, if you think about it.
I know. I understand that.
With the box, we just have to compute 6 planes, and there you go. But what you're suggesting is, well, it would be quite a lot more.
The convex hull.
Yeah.
You have to compute the convex hull. But we have pretty efficient code to compute the convex hull of things these days.
Well, in the kernel.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we...
Do you want the front end to have to call the kernel?
If we send along spherical region to true, we could send along a convex hull. Send along convex hull data. Because we can't change spherical region. Spherical region to true is a kernel issue.
Is it a kernel
What do you
issue?
mean by that?
I have no idea what he means by that.
Well, are you saying that purely in the notebook you can change spherical region to true and change the behavior without ever doing?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
it's a graphics 3D box setting.
It's not common for people to do it, but it's absolutely possible.
Well, then do a kernel round trip if they change it. In the obscure case of boxed as false, I mean, it's better to do the right thing than to not do the right thing. Better do the right thing and have a kernel round trip than to not do the right thing. All right, let's unpack a little bit what we've said here. Okay, first point. The behavior of leaving room for a virtual box when there isn't a box is crazy. And we should just get rid of it, particularly for cases where by default there isn't a box. But I think we should get rid of it in all cases when there isn't a box. So the only question is when we leave room for a virtual box, so to speak. And the general case of that is we leave room for virtual lots of stuff. In fact, what we end up with is essentially a region-defining graphic independent of the graphic itself. Am I making sense? So the region-defining graphic could be a graphics 3D with boxed and et cetera, or it could be either overlay options to the existing graphic, or it could be its own primitives. Does that make sense?
I did not follow that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so what I'm saying is there is a graphic, there is a ghost graphic that defines what space should be left. Okay, that ghost graphic could be bigger than this graphic, it could be smaller than this graphic. In other words, imagine that what I really want to see is the spherical region right in the center of this graphic. I don't want to see anything else. I'm perfectly happy to have my zoom level by default be that. But in other words, I could define a shadow graphic essentially that defines the drawing region for this graphic. Did that make sense to people? And that shadow graphic could, for example, be this graphic with boxed on or something else. Are you getting what I'm saying? I mean, that's the general case, I think. Yes? No? John? Itai? Other people? Does this make some sense?
I think it makes sense as I understand it. I mean, I don't know that I can necessarily foresee what the consequences might be.
Okay, well, let me put it this way. If we did this, if we said, leave enough space. So now the question is, where are you leaving the space? Is it, there are multiple places to leave space. There's inside the frame, there's outside the frame. There's basically image padding and plot range padding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not totally obvious which of those for example, in the case where I've got this, okay, let's take a look at this guy. Okay, let's look at this piece of lunacy. Let's see if I say frame arrow true.
It's not an option for 3D.
I see. And if I were to say frame duh, it would just go outside the bounding box.
Right. I mean, you would be wrapping framed around your show, and so
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
it's not doing anything notable with respect to this. That framed is then taking into account image padding, correct?
That frame is taking into account the entirety of the graphics 3D box.
Okay, so if I do this, very impressively, the framed responds accordingly. Beautiful.
Sure, yeah.
Magnificent. I would argue that, I mean, I might want a little bit more padding here. If I did want more padding, what would I do? I would say image padding.
Image padding goes to 10.
Yeah, I didn't remember for sure what
units is that in?
Didn't do what I expected.
It should not work. It will.
It's frame margins. Frame margins.
That's because a different thing.
This is. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were passing it to framed. Sorry.
I'm passing it to the graphic. I want to see the graphic.
Aren't you being mutually contradictory, saying you wanted shrink wrap and adding padding?
No, I don't think so. I think that's the whole point. I think shrink wrap is the wrong option. Okay, I think shrink wrap. Listen, the main issue is, am I leaving? Okay, so there are two things I could leave room for: other graphics primitives like boxed, or speculative rotation. Does that make sense? I mean, I could imagine speculative other things other than rotation, but let's just stick with rotation for now. I mean, for example, here's an example. Let's say that I have a graphic that contains a tab view, and the tab view has different sizes. I could leave room for speculative opening of the tab view, but by that point, it's hopeless. It's like ValueQ. You know, to know what could possibly happen is a hopeless task.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, by the way, does tab view have a way of equal sizing? Don't those things?
Yeah, image size all.
Okay. Okay.
The downside is that it's much more expensive. Because
I understand. You have to try all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And if some of those things have dynamics, you have to resolve all the dynamics.
Mm-hmm. And it only works at the time. Well, I don't even want to know when it determines the answer. I mean, in other words, the thing you're looking at.
It determines the answer before it displays a tab view, which means if you're loading a notebook, you might be twiddling your thumbs if it's expensive.
Well, but also it could be the case that the tab that you are currently looking at should be resized because of a change in another tab.
Yes, and that would happen.
Wow. Okay. Cool. If crazy. Okay.
Not everything's broken about our product.
No, I know. There's a lot of great stuff. Okay. All right. So let's come back to this. All right. The two cases.
So yeah, I don't know what the interaction of image padding here should have been. I think image margins. I don't remember if you tried that. I think image margins should work.
What's the difference between image margins and image padding?
Well, so I'm frankly unclear in the 2D case.
Okay, I don't know what the heck
rather in the 3D case.
What on earth happened here?
Well, it's the scaled thing. You shouldn't have used scaled. Just use the default is points. Just like do 10 or something, or whatever, or 30 or yeah. There you go.
Okay, but I'm clipping against that.
Yes, that's wrong. That's. Because yeah, that should be adding outside. It looks like it's pushing inside the graphic, and that should be adding outside.
It is pushing inside. It should.
Yeah, maybe it has to do with the shrink wrap. I don't know.
Yeah, it is, but yeah.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's come back out to the main point here. Okay. Two things: leave room for primitives and leave room for speculative rotation. Okay.
Yeah. So just by the way, something that might be easier than doing, a convex hull and passing that around. We might be able. I'd have to talk to you two about this offline, but we might be able to do this fairly efficiently in the front end if it's not a perfect convex hull, but if we do something like, I mean, right now we're doing essentially a cube. If we did something like an icosahedron instead.
Weird. I mean, so what you're basically suggesting is you just take the coordinate bounds with respect to particular orientations.
Yes. We're already doing that, but only with 6 orientations.
Yeah.
If we decide to do it with, say, 20.
Yeah. That might be sufficient. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we want... Well, I mean, okay. Yeah, we basically just need bounding planes. It doesn't necessarily have to be a regular polyhedron, actually. You're just suggesting more bounding planes and nobody would know the difference.
Right. I mean, if you pulled out your magnifying glass, you'd definitely be able to tell in certain cases. But I think we're looking, for a close enough is close enough.
It could be parameterized with a method option if we had to.
Right. And it's
also go ahead.
Well, I was also going to point out that it's not as if, convex hull will necessarily get it, perfectly right, pixel perfect, if it's a sufficiently complicated graphics.
And it also has all kinds of weird tentacles in it, like specially rendered,
Right. Like if you stuck in a lower dimensional region, it might miss it or something.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but okay, fine. I like John's suggestion there. Okay, so we think we can deal with speculative rotation. Okay, let's deal with the primitives question. Okay, so my claim is that there are 2 kinds of things one could do. One is graphics primitives, the other is options. Unfortunately, the options might depend on, I mean, the thing that is guaranteed to work is you just give it a graphic and you say, leave room for this graphic. Do you see what I'm saying?
Usually we just give opacity of 0 for that. Then you put it in together in the list.
Fine. But we're not going to ask our users to have that hack.
Right. But if it's a simple
implementation,
if it's a simple specification, then we could automate that.
Right. I mean, if basically what it is you just ghost it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what that's saying. But it's got to be a full ghosting. Nothing pokes out of, there's no paranormal weirdness here.
Right.
There's no opacity that's inside the ghosted thing that somehow de-opacifies the opacity 0.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's look at what that would look like. Okay, so then what that would be is something like, should it be called? Plot range graphics region or something is defined by that graphic. And then what we could do is we could have a shorthand there that says things like, something like boxed arrow true. In other words, graphics region could take either a graphics object or some naked options. I think actually we want to call it something less, graphics rendering region. Something like graphics rendering region or something, or rendering region. Maybe it doesn't want to be called region.
Well, it certainly is a property of the renderer that we're talking about.
Can we avoid using region? Because region is used for other things. What else could we call this?
Volume. I mean, that's used for other things too. Might have the same complaint.
It's not necessarily a volume. We want to do it in 2D as well. Want to do the exact same thing in 2D. Okay, what are the family of other things related to it? It's things like image padding.
I mean, mostly things with padding or margin in the name.
I mean, but it's related to, even just plain plot range, isn't it?
Look, plot rendering region would probably be fairly unambiguous. Plot rendering region could take so that would be a way. I don't know precisely its interaction with image padding and plot range padding. That has to be thought about. But plot rendering region would be a leave room for this thing, right? So there are three possibilities. It could be graphics primitives. I mean, it could be a full graphics object. You know, in the USU opacity 0 hack, anything that works for that, together with naked options, together with what are we saying? Together with possibly an absolute coordinate bounds thing. Okay, so question here. So the default value of plot rendering region would be automatic, or would it be inherited?
No. Don't ask us to use inherited as right-hand side. That has implications you're not thinking about.
Okay, all right, fine.
So out of curiosity, what does plot region do as an option that I never use?
Frankly, it's not something that it's in my head for about 5 minutes anytime I really need it, and then it dumps out again.
How can the examples here not even mention plot region? Oh,
because they're giving the base state.
Plot region does this, I think. No, plot region. Okay, so this is an outside the box thing, right? Well, what happens? Okay, because this, if there's a box, yeah, this is actually what we're talking about, isn't it?
Well, it can be inside or outside the box depending on. But I mean, it doesn't have to include the entire box, is what I mean.
No, I understand that. I understand that. But it's saying exactly what we're talking about here. This is our plot rendering region, which we already called plot region. And all we're suggesting here, go ahead.
Sorry, why is it taking 2D coordinates? It's like taking the 0, 1 scaled things or something?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. I mean, this is an option that was built for the 2D world, and then kind of applied retroactively onto 3D as if it were 2D.
It has a pathetic set of examples, absolutely pathetic.
Probably because no one's looked at it since V6.
Yeah, and it's older than most of our employees.
And frankly, I don't think, let me confirm, but I don't think it's a huge source of bugs, which is usually an indication that either
nobody uses it, or
either people aren't using it or they've given up on it.
I mean, I suspect that the general padding options that we have these days provide better controls that are easier to understand and easier to work with than plot region.
Yeah, we've got 3 bugs on this, and the last update on any of them was over 5 years ago.
That recent?
Okay. When I say update might include that QA said still reproducible or something like that,
or change the QA context or
fine.
something.
But this plot region is very closely related to this plot rendering region thing that we just invented. The region in scaled coordinates that the plot should fill in the final display area. Boy, that's confusing.
Well, I mean, if you think of it purely as a 2D problem, it's not that confusing.
Okay, so if we were to introduce plot rendering region, maybe we retire plot region. Sander on our live stream is pointing out something which he says is horrifying, but let's see what it is. By the way, this thing here with the box ratios, I just think is bonkers. And did we manage to find Charles? No? Okay. So
no,
can somebody ask him about this? Because it just seems completely bonkers to me.
Yeah, I'll send this to him.
What the heck is that? What did it just do? Help! First of all, why did it tube up like that?
What did you do?
Well, I put a plot range in there. What on earth is it doing? Am I seeing? Oh, I'm seeing the inner struts. That's just the very inside struts. The problem is that the center of rotation is not where I think it is. Do you see what I'm saying? That plot range 20 should make, well, the center of rotation isn't necessarily the center of rotation of this object. Right? I'm sure if I say plot range to 200, I'll see the, what is going on?
What's the plot range on the underlying graph?
Wait. How could plot range of 200 have made that kind of blastular thing?
Well, it was clearly plot range is causing you to zoom in. I don't know why it is, but
can you get rid of shrink wrap?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting object that we see there.
I suspect that it's doing some calculation based on the plot range, like determining the radii of the spheres and tubes. And then shrink wrap is drastically changing the scale.
Okay, good bug. Thank you, Sander. Very, very weird bug. Okay, so that's a nasty interaction between shrink wrap and plot range.
Can you move the plot range inside the graph? I don't know if it'll change anything or not. I'm just... No, okay.
Just a different angle on the blastula.
It's a pretty cool shape.
It is. It's a creature. It's gonna replicate eventually. It's gonna turn into a fine lizard or something. Okay. Well, that's just a bug. All right. Let's just review the comments that have come in on our live stream, and then I want to come and make this a conclusion.
Yeah, but that is a shrink wrap thing, by the way.
Okay.
If you pull out shrink wrap, it doesn't do that.
Okay.
And yeah, I suspect it has to do with shrink wrap, zooming in on something which is, kind of less and less granular in terms of the computed sizes of the tubes and spheres and such. That's my guess.
Ethan is commenting on our live stream. Wouldn't it be nice to have a workflow to show how to connect controllers to graphics 3D? We have had that for 15 years, haven't we?
Since 2007.
Oh, I was wrong by a few years. It's only 13 years.
Yeah.
What would we look at here?
Controller linking?
Gamepad and device interface. Connecting to external devices, that's kind of lame. We should have a workflow on the Gamepad thing. That is a good suggestion. But we have all this stuff.
Which, by the way, and this is all...
Click on connecting to external devices, because that's a guide.
So it should be noted that until 12.1, this has always just worked by default. That all you have to do is plug in the controller and select it.
What do you mean? Did something get broken?
What happened was
Apple got broken.
Yeah, I mean there were two things. First of all, we frequently got reports from users saying, "What the heck? my thing is consuming CPU or graphics just started moving or something like that, it's because they had a controller plugged in they didn't even know about. That was issue number one. Yeah. Issue number two, and the one that really kicked us into motion on this, was Catalina. Catalina basically said, if you are going to ask about this preemptively, then we are going to force you to throw up scary permissions requests for the user. And we were doing that like at startup. And that was not acceptable.
Okay, so what are we doing now?
So we changed the default values of the options to control this. So they're off by default, but you can still turn them on.
I see. That's not silly. But does this say what to do here?
I have not. I didn't even think to update the workflows. So I've updated the various function homepages, but yeah, I guess the workflows are going to need to be updated.
Okay.
Yes, and the same thing is true for manipulates as well as 3D graphics. We made similar changes in both areas.
Okay.
There is, however, a thing called a controller manipulate, and since if you're using controller manipulate, you really wanted to use controllers, everything is on for that.
Fine, but let's make sure that this is reported in the release notes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and we also should do the workflow thing. So my question here, I mean, I was trying to get this VR setup to work for my physics project stuff, and what I really want is kind of the Iron Man interface where I can, because I'm dealing with these crazy 3D graph things. And, I guess Charles was going to try and write a thing that actually does spring electrical embedding where you can pick up a piece of the graph and move it in VR, so to speak. But the problem with that is how do you what is the, how do you control that? What do you do? I mean, the best thing would be, some hand, leap motion-y type thing. Leap motion just got bought by somebody. Who bought it? Facebook or somebody? I don't remember who bought it. It doesn't sound promising for its future. But is there a way to do that with anything we have right now? If I wanted to do that, if I wanted to do a controller where I can sense my position relative to something in VR, I guess that's more something to be done on the Unity side, I suspect.
Yeah. Everything I'm aware of is in Unity. We've been playing a little bit with some AR stuff in the iOS front end, but we haven't done any serious VR in the last fair number of years in the desktop front end. It's leaving that to Unity.
Right. Well, but I mean, listen, we got burnt in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Look, I finally have a use case. We'll see whether it actually works out. I finally have a real use case where we're uploading flexible 3D graphs that are manipulable, and what I want is to stick them in a kind of a warehouse in VR.
Yeah. Now that said, I mean, I think most of what's been done in what we've done in Unity so far hasn't involved this kind of interactive manipulation that you want to do.
I know. We have to have a specific Unity app which takes our assets and does that with them.
Yes, and I'm sure it's possible, but I'll bet that nobody's done anything that complex.
Charles said he was trying to work on that. Anyway, okay, let's go back to the live stream questions. Will Graphics 3D have a toolbar? Not in 12.1, sadly. Hopefully in 12.2.
Yeah, it's definitely on the roadmap.
Pinch zoom still doesn't work.
Yeah, that's on the roadmap too.
Now that we've got full support for all the 64-bit stuff, we should be able to do that.
Yeah, well, yes, it was Cocoa. Rewriting everything to Cocoa was the big. Which also was part of the 64-bit project, but yes.
And other gestures. I mean, one could imagine, for example, this rotation control thing.
Yes.
Presumably that.
I mean, gestures throughout the front end, not just in 3D graphics.
But in particular, rotation control could be done with gestures, except nobody will ever learn them.
I mean, like one of the simplest and most annoying ones to me is, being able to use the typical 2-finger swipe back gesture to, go back in the help viewer. And we couldn't even get that. But in principle, we should now be able to.
Okay. Show box, yes, no, invisible. That's a reasonable suggestion. boxed arrow, true, false. That's a good suggestion. To deal with the boxed case, that's an interesting suggestion. True, false, and invisible.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good suggestion. I mean, that would deal with that. I mean, I think we want a more general solution, but that would certainly deal with, wow, that's an old thing. Wow, that hasn't been touched since then. Wowee, look at that.
What would we have done with it?
I don't know. I like that suggestion. Boxed arrow, invisible. Or we could just call it transparent, right? Which is a symbol that we have, which might be clearer.
Doesn't transparent evaluate to opacity
Transparent
0?
does evaluate. Yeah, that's I don't like that because of that. It
doesn't mean that evaluates to opacity of 0.
Now invisible is also a symbol that we have, but it's actually a function.
What does it do? Oh, it's invisible for it makes things invisible.
Yes. It's a typesetting generator.
Right, which is in fact what we would want to do. I mean, the other possibility is that we support that in graphics and make invisible be the equivalent of opacity 0 in graphics.
It wouldn't be difficult to support in graphics. It'd be pretty straightforward, I think.
This is just going to pink box, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, but we could make it typeset to, something that just sets all the options to opacity 0.
That seems useful. But I think, okay, so let's zoom out again for a minute. All right, I think we should fix the connection between boxed and spherical region should simply be removed. If there isn't a box, don't leave space for it. Unless perhaps we have boxed arrow invisible.
Okay.
You don't think boxed arrow
you haven't been, I mentioned the invisible being a function because you haven't been crazy about using function names as...
I don't want to use function names as... But I mean, boxed, do you think boxed arrow automatic makes any sense? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
I don't have a concrete alternative to suggest.
We could have false mean the same thing it has always meant, and use none for the.
Yes, that's reasonable.
Yeah. For the case of leaving the space.
I was suggesting the opposite. False means don't.
False means don't draw the box.
See.
None means the box shouldn't exist in any way whatsoever.
I don't particularly like that because people use box to false all the time to... I think the case of leaving the mysterious space for the box is really obscure.
I'm not going to argue with that.
Okay. All right, so listen, let's go ahead, boxed arrow in quotes invisible, and let's try and support the invisible wrapper, but that's lower priority. And let us look at the possibility of a plot rendering region, but we need to understand how that interacts with every other piece of weird padding we have out there. Okay, I mean, the plot rendering region thing might help with the long-term issue of how do you line up, comparable graphics, in an array. Okay, were there any other loose ends here?
And then the other thing was just trying to do instead of the rendering the 6 planes, using more planes to figure out what the actual sphere is.
Good idea. Yeah, very good idea. Okay, there's a suggestion here about 3D rotation controllers from things like Blender. We certainly looked at those back when we designed the current 3D rotation controller. It's a complicated area. It might be worth seeing whether there are some new things that have evolved in that area. Okay, and meanwhile, that weird bug with the shrink wrapping. Okay, so we're going to do, don't leave space for the box, which is equivalent to the shrink wrapping. We don't need the shrink wrapping now. We're just not leaving space for the box, correct, Yusu and everybody?
I am not 100% certain if those two propositions are totally equivalent, but we can figure that out.
Let's figure that out ASAP. Okay, all right, we've got a good solution here. All right, I think we had other things on our agenda for today, but I think we're already over time, although I would like to just bring up, so we got a bunch of people here for this.
Yeah, but I think we just have to push this off to next time.
We have to push this, right. I mean, this is interesting, but okay, I want to bring up blacklisted contexts for a minute, because I'm seeing yet more weird contexts show up, and I want to understand our procedure here. I mean, like, whatever that is shouldn't be there. So my question is, how do we find out what these are, and how do we hunt them down and get rid of them?
Well, right, the only way to find out what they are is to do a code search for the context. And right, I mean,
augmented data comes from stats.
Right, I was going to say, if you just look at the symbols it defines, it's clearly some sort of stats utility context.
Okay, fine, but okay, my question is this. Within the code base, we can either automatically search the code base, we can try and pick it up in QA tests, we can try to figure out what's been documented, because if it hasn't been documented ever, okay, so to me, there are several different things. We could scan the documentation for all contexts that are mentioned, right? Those are whitelisted, right? We can then scan the code base for contexts that it mentions. Those are by default blacklisted. Does anybody have a better suggestion?
I mean, at least for some of the ones, I think you could get a lot of the context to blacklist as a side effect of when the MX files are built for the kernel.
Fine. That's a good place to get it. But look, so we've got things which are definitely whitelisted, which is things mentioned in documentation. Things which are definitely blacklisted, like the MX files building stuff. Probably they're all blacklisted. Probably, unless they're mentioned.
Except for the ones that are documented, yes.
Except for the ones that are whitelisted.
Right. Okay, and then I would recommend scanning the rest of the code base. Plus, I would recommend that we have, we keep something when the QA tests are run. Every time, there's a bunch of testing being done, we see what contexts were created. And those become, if they're not documented, of course, there could be ones that are created as part of testing the context system. But who do we think is responsible for a project management point of view for dealing with this blacklisting stuff?
Well, the blacklisting, I mean, the actual implementation side of blacklisting is done by Tom Sherlock. So that would mean Parth. In terms of finding the things to be blacklisted, that's not something that's ever been really discussed. I mean, right, we have certain patterns. So like, dump, right?
All right, okay.
Dump or anything private is automatically blacklisted. And
okay, listen, it needs to be one of the PMs who's dealing with core system stuff. So I don't know who is Devin. Was Devin PMing this meeting?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so I think it's up to you to figure out. It's either you or it's somebody that you find.
Okay, yeah,
this.
I'll ask around.
And I mean, this should come to the next release meeting.
Sure.
Okay.
Got it.
Stephen, I would like to propose that we don't delve into this quite yet, just because we're working on this problem in a related context for save definitions. So
okay.
We should.
Okay, well, those should be merged. But I mean, we do need this inventory of things, and we could certainly improve on what we have right now incrementally. Right, by the way, a suggestion on the live stream about bookmarking viewpoints. Yeah, we've talked about, I mean, there are two things we've talked about for a long time. One is standard camera, like when when people make movies and things, they have these crazy, you know, cameras mounted on these, what are those things called? Those arms that go up and down, and somebody sits at the, I don't remember what those things are called, but you know, there are these standard motions, some of which got invented by some particular cinematographer for some particular movie, you know, there's standard motions of sweeping around a graphic and things. And we've long intended, Brett, maybe you can comment on this. We've long intended to support a bunch of those sweeping kinds of things. And I suppose now that we have video support, that becomes more realistic. Comment.
I mean, I think definitely it'll come, you know, I mean, become more, you know, necessary with the video stuff.
So, by the way, I'll just point out that we have a rudimentary form of this in the 3D image toolbar.
Okay, what does it do?
I mean, it's not, you know, it doesn't have a large number of options, but it has kind of, you know, the obvious ones: random image.
Well, I was 3D. Can I do a 3D image?
Yeah. Random image of 1, list of 555.
Okay, where's my toolbar? There's my toolbar. Okay.
It's the next to the right, next to the eye. Yeah, view options. So, I mean, you know, what we're looking at here isn't.
Yeah,
you know,
that's not in motion.
It's not in motion, and it's not kind of, you know, maybe some of the more interesting stuff, but it's a starting point.
No, I agree. I think the one in motion, I don't even know. I mean, is that something we could imagine, John? Is that something we could imagine as a front end thing, that we have something which
absolutely
defines?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a view, basically.
But however, what we have, I mean, if you're going to have a motion, then I mean, one of the, you know, structures involved in that is, you know, defining, you know, something that looks like a path. And we have some constructs that are a bit like paths, but we've been kind of knocking around the notion of, you know, defining a proper path, you know, structure for a long time without having.
What do you mean a path structure? I mean, why isn't it just a line? Or it's a line in rotation
because you don't
space.
you don't usually want a straight line.
No, I understand, but it's a line in some
I mean, it's, you know, it's I mean, one could imagine, you know, like, you know, an interpolating function.
What it is,
points.
Okay, let's be clear. It's elements of SO3. Actually, more than just SO3. It's more than elements of the rotation group. Because it has zooming and things as well. So you're actually making a line in.
Yeah. Well, yes. There's also facing, and there's also, I mean, what we would refer to as the angular view, what you just called zooming.
Right. But I mean, so the fact is that there are many bizarre coordinate systems one can imagine in these groups, which we haven't even parameterized. We've parameterized some coordinate systems for graphics, but that's different from parameterizing them in the rotation group.
Yeah.
But by the way, someone on the live stream, Andre on the live stream, says they are called giraffes, by which he probably means those things that make cameras go up and down. That's a good name for them. In any case, it's a good name which we could use somehow in our system, because it will not conflict with anything except, of course,
well, except for a control equal giraffe.
Yeah, right. Actually, I wonder whether now that I think about it, I wonder whether we have, uses a word instead. Okay. Stop playing here. Why is that? Okay. We don't have the movie vernacular, apparently. Okay. The point being made here also by Ethan was this thing about bookmarking viewpoints. I agree that will be useful, and hopefully that is part of the graphics 3D toolbar.
Yeah. we can definitely put that under consideration.
But I mean, just for 1 second, this thing about swooping, give me a name. Somebody must have a name for at least one of those weird...
The Matrix is, I think...
Yeah, the Matrix has a... But it's not called the Matrix. It's whatever that thing is called, that weird, sort of...
Right, the 60 frames in the circle to get the slow motion shot, right?
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so something like that.
Bullet time? We're going to add bullet time to our product?
No. No, I'm talking about, look, I'm just talking about something where you have there's some definite kind of motion where you have a 3D object and you have some sort of stylized way of looking around the 3D object.
Sure.
Okay. And the question is, let's say we define that. We define the path in the appropriate transformation group. Okay. Now, what that turns into, presumably, is a viewer that has a trigger of some kind. Or it could be continuously doing it, I suppose, if it's a closed path. Right, I mean, what you would have in mind then is in the front end, either something which is sitting there continuously animating, or it's something which has a button and it's triggered.
Well, and a related thing, and something that we support in iOS, but we don't support on the desktop, is the ability to do a throw.
Yes.
What does a throw mean in this context?
Rotate and keep going.
So in other words, when you
But typically with inertia, that slows down over time.
Right. So that's when you spin the thing and it slows down. Yes.
So on iOS, you press and hold and then just kind of swipe and let go, and it just goes, and it has inertia, but inertia that peters out over time.
Let's be clear, it's not in fact inertia, it's friction. Inertia would make it keep going.
Well, I mean, the inertia makes it keep going for a while, and the friction makes it stop.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, but so, I mean, so that's a gesture-based thing. I mean, that's one way to invoke that. Your point is that there's a way to trigger the thing that isn't you press a button on the screen that is a trigger.
Right, and I mean, part of the reason we did that on iOS is because the gesture for doing it was obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that it's difficult to implement. It's
utterly undiscoverable.
Yeah, how do we do it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the only way we could do it is something where clearly, if we have a ribbon, one of the buttons there can be an information button, which can show little drawings of how you do the gestures, but it's a little weird. Anyway, something that it would be a good thing to do. I mean, I know, look, I've been very frustrated recently with these elongated box ratio things and trying to turn them around, and it would have been very nice to just have a thing that auto turns them. I mean, I've been trying to learn how to get for some of these really weird objects.
And to be clear, I'm not surprised that there are bugs around this, because there's a history of bugs around these guys.
Yeah.
So there are a number of exceptional things in the code, basically to deal with things that exceed a certain aspect ratio.
I see. Okay. I mean, look, the main thing that I've been having an experience with is these very weird objects that are very hard to visualize, very hard for humans like me at least to sort of understand conceptually, and I'm trying to get some sense of what you actually do. And clearly, one thing that is obvious about 3D is just jigging back and forth helps in understanding what the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
That always helps, and being able to do that somehow automatically, being able to press a button down in the that might be useful, to have a button which you can hold down and it jigs back and forth while you're holding down the button.
Sort of like in the modern cell phone cameras where you get a spot of motion in your picture.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I suppose. But I mean, what I have in mind here is when you hold down the button, the thing is jigging back and forth. Just to give you some, I know I agree with the effect. But I mean, this clearly, if you see that image without any motion, it's really unclear what it is. As soon as you see that little bit of motion, it becomes much clearer what it is. So I think that will be, and presumably Path is PMing this graphics 3D toolbar. Is that correct?
Yes.
So why don't we make that suggestion as a thing, as a small motion? I don't even think it matters which direction.
Well, I mean, that might not even. One could imagine maybe if it's a subtle effect, one could imagine doing it even just when you select the graphic. You don't have to have a button for it at all. Then.
Oh, I think that would. Well. You mean that it just
does, or just a quick little one as soon as you select it?
I think a little one when you select it would be cool.
I mean, I agree that there's a possibility it could drive everyone up the wall, but I think there's a possibility that it won't, and it's maybe.
Well, as you point out, selection. What about if you select something which contains many graphics? If you select a cell, do they all nod at you at the same time?
No, one after the other.
I was thinking more only if you directly selected it. But that, yes, that would be highly amusing.
Thinking each one could take a bow and turn. I think if they do it, well, I don't know. That's a good idea, though. It's an interesting idea. All right. Okay. Anything else we need to cover right now, right here?
You still think I prepared too few agenda items?
No.
All right.
Good work. Okay. Do I need to send this notebook back to Devin because I'm not otherwise saving this?
Yes. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. All right. See you guys soon. Thanks all to folks on the live stream. See you all in due course.
Bye-bye.
Bye.